Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, July the 4th, 2022. And I'd like to begin by wishing all my American friends a very happy 4th of July. You know, it is 60 degrees Fahrenheit right now, 4 o'clock Pacific time, Victoria. And I was joking to a friend of mine about a month ago that this could be the year without summer. This what they called what happened in the world after the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883, where there was so much volcanic dust and ash thrown into the atmosphere that the sun was occluded. It didn't reach 60 here in Victoria over the entire holiday weekend. This has been the coldest late winter, spring, and summer that I have ever spent in Victoria, and I've been here since 2001. And of course, they say that that weather is not climate. Well, over a long enough period, it is climate. So much for this global warming we hear so much about. Let's go to Jim Kunstler's column today, which is called A Great Endeavor. I wish I had a time machine, he begins. I would teleport a small delegation of Ben Franklin, Tom Jefferson, and Button Gwinnett from their sweltering labors at Independence Hall, then known as the Pennsylvania State House, to a drag queen story hour hosted by Lil Miss Hot Mess, the people's drag queen, reading from her best-selling book, The Hips on the Drag Queen Go Swish, 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 to a roomful of 6-year-old offspring birthed by America's current progressive ruling elite. Here, I would explain, is what it has come to. Have today's elites in our country, marinated in social justice and frantically signaling their goodness and virtue, gone perhaps a tad too far in their quest to liberate the populace from boundaries previously established for human behavior? It's one thing, to throw off the onerous yoke of a British king and his agents with their vexing taxes, despotic harassments, abuses, and usurpations. It's perhaps another thing empowering children to bethink themselves monomaniacs of sexual confusion years before they're mentally equipped to divine the conundrums of sex. What, after all, is a hot mess? Well, Google's top search answer from the Oxford Languages website defines hot mess thusly: a person or thing that is spectacularly unsuccessful or disordered, especially one that is a source of peculiar fascination. Okay, I see. This metaphor signifies what the ruling elites would like America to become, and more generally, Western civ, that agglomeration of fusty creeds, shop-worn traditions, oppressive laws, dubious virtues, and racist arts. Mission accomplished, then. Kunstler continues, on July the 4th, 2022, America is a hot mess, but exactly. Are we not now spectacularly unsuccessful and disordered in body, mind, polity, culture, mores, convictions, and assertions? What is functioning in America these days? Absolutely nothing. Say it again, to quote a song lyric of my bygone youth when our project in Vietnam had gone off the rails. Of course, that was then, and this is now. Back then, say 1970, we were the exuberant avatar of modernity, and the rest of the world was still a little groggy from World War II. In that America, a man could easily support a family. We never gave a thought to our oil supply, and the doctor would see you now. This birthday of the Republic, we are on track to go medieval, or something that at least rhymes with it. I'm regretful as anyone to leave so much baggage behind, but frankly, it's been a long time since all the fun was over and Daddy took the T-Bird away. Daddy himself is gone, along with all representations of him. Donald Trump tried to play the role in a movie called The Years Before COVID-19, but the critics savaged him. Anyone who dares try to be Daddy in America now will be Me Too'd and J6'd to a fare thee well. We've been warned. In your New World Order of Bill Gates and the Schwabenklaus's Great Reset, we are all expected to be a hot mess so the exterminations can proceed without resistance. Kunstler continues, I, for one, refuse to comply with all that insolent wickedness and urge you to join with me in making something decent, honorable, and workable in the vast salvage yard that America will be when we expel the degenerate maniacs who broke it to pieces. You do not have to be a hot mess. You can, for instance, be a man, or another instance, be a woman. These binaries of human reproduction can produce new humans. A man, a woman, and a child will comprise a family, a good start in rebuilding the organism called a society. Kunstler concludes, the chief duty of men and women in this future will be doing everything possible to ensure that their children do not become hot messes. Their duties beyond that entail the search for purpose, meaning, and happiness, and building institutions to support those ends. We can start with the language we use amongst ourselves to make sense of who we are and where we are. Our language must have a rigorous correlation with reality, which makes it possible to determine what things are true and what are not true. The time will soon be at hand when it is possible to tell who is speaking the truth and who is not. A battle may ensue over this, and those on the side of the truth will prevail. Consider those propositions as you flip your burgers and hoist your malty brews today. Think of the men who gathered at Independence Hall 246 years ago and the trepidation they felt facing the unknown as they signed their names, pledged their fortunes, and committed their sacred honor to a great endeavor. Let's go to the chat. And hello to Ruslan Akhmatov, Anrun, who Ruslan reports just had a delicious chicken Caesar wrap, vegetarian pizza coming up later. Chokin 666, there was another mass shooting today. Yes, in the Chicago area. Brian Frake says, Buenos dias, mi amigos. Anrun says, for those who don't know, Highland Park is not one of the crappy parts of the Chicago area. It is very well off. Michael Jordan and several other Bulls had homes there. It is also very democratic. Yes, apparently it is a white shooter. I don't know. I'm not going to talk about this. I just expect more and more and more of these incidents to happen as Western Civ, as Jim Kunstler likes to say, goes progressively more insane. A little Palpcasso 88, Dan and Seven Costanza. Hello to Jason Quinn, who says this is MAGA country. And Dan says the grand solar minimum is imminent. Seven Costanza says, I live in Seattle and we've had 4 nice days this summer. Anrun reports it has been plenty hot in the Midwest. Hello to Yo Mama. Ruslan says, I prefer Yandex search, seems more organic, less curated. Chokin 666, quoting Richard Spencer, what possible harm could exposing children to drag queens cause? Highland Park is on the North Shore and is very white and well off, says Anrun. Hello to John S. and Gamion. And Metal Mike says that sniper sure is a hot mess. Looks like Andrea Horwath's son and also a rapper. Yes, Andrea Horwath is the leader of the New Democratic Party in Ontario and has been for quite a few years. And what was it, several elections ago, her son was revealed to be a disgruntled metalhead, not on board with his mother's message. Last name Cremo, says Gamion. Sounds Italian to me. Palpcasso 88 says, speaking of bad movies, I caught the Tom Hanks comedy, The Money Pit, last night. It was horrible. I haven't seen it since it came out, and it is horrible, but I remember it being horrible. Thank you, Jason Quinn, for your kind words. I had a happy enough birthday. Let's talk about the truth. George Orwell said famously, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And yes, here's a story from Newsweek, a very, very sad story, a sinister one, actually. And it is by Brendan Cole. Putin to exploit U.S. economic plan to bring Biden midterms misery, according to experts. Yes. Whenever someone breaks a shoelace in America now, it is Russia's fault. This is what the experts have been reduced to. Russia retaliated again this week to U.S. sanctions with its latest blacklist of Americans, which included Joe Biden's family. Experts warn Moscow could try to harm Biden more directly in the midterm elections by raising questions about the cost of the Ukraine war. Yes, as Pedro Gonzalez pointed out, the planted axiom here is that if you're not a full-on Russian hater who believes that no dollar should be spared in the meat grinder that is the Ukraine, you are effectively a Russian bot. The intelligence community, the same intelligence community that tried and failed a coup d'etat from 2016 to 2020, that intelligence community has already raised concerns that Vladimir Putin will draw on the playbook of cyber attacks and propaganda, which evidence shows impacted the 2016 and 2020 U.S. elections. Oh, did it now? With costly U.S. support for Ukraine as Americans battle soaring inflation, which Biden blames on Putin, as well as a possible recession, could give the Kremlin ample opportunity to exploit division as voters go to the polls in November. Remember to vote Democratic because that is your patriotic duty. Anything Putin can do to sow doubt in Americans' minds about the moral necessity, economic cost, and practical impact of our support for Ukraine's sovereignty, he surely will attempt. This is according to Stephen Hansen, Vice Provost for Academic and International Affairs at Virginia's College of William and Mary. The concerns come as former U.S. intelligence officials, liars, every single one of them, have warned that Putin will try to get Americans to question their support for Ukraine and promote politicians who can reverse sanctions. Homeland and national security officials told CNN, that house of lies, that Russia might be considering staging hacks of local election authorities. Oh, I see. So if the Republicans win a big victory in November, it's because they cheated with Russian help. This is the line that's being laid down. Oh, with the deliberate purpose of being noticed. They could then use that to promote more conspiracies about the integrity of the American elections, which could be amplified on Facebook and Twitter. Oh, this is coming from a man who has just told us, in effect, that Russia stole the 2016 election. A declassified report by the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis warned that Russia would likely depress voting and undermine the midterms in revenge for the U.S.-led response to the invasion of Ukraine. The DHS report, which also described threats coming from China and Iran, said that Moscow would view this as an equitable response to U.S. actions over Ukraine. I mean, you mean the various American acts of war against Russia? These include tough sanctions on Russia, as well as Washington providing $1.4 billion in a security aid package to Kyiv that included high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS. But with inflation at the U.S. at 11% and Biden repeatedly connecting Putin's name with the economic turmoil they are feeling right now, Americans might balk in the coming months at their support for Ukraine, which the Kremlin could tap into. Yes. Not a sparrow falls from a tree without being directed by Moscow. Latest from Ukraine. This is from the New York Times. The last major city held in Ukraine in the heavily contested eastern province of Luhansk has fallen, military officials on both sides said Sunday, giving Moscow a milestone victory in its campaign to capture the Donbass, the mineral-rich region bordering Russia that has long been in President Vladimir Putin's sights. The industrial city of Lysychansk, on a rise overlooking the Seversky Donets River, had held out for a week after Russia seized control of Svierodonetsk, its twin city across the river. But as Russia inundated Lysychansk with artillery fire and strangled its supply lines, building on months of bombardment and weeks of ferocious street fighting that reduced both cities to grayed out husks, Ukrainian defenders were forced to retreat. That left Russian soldiers posing for pictures outside Lysychansk City Hall, chanting, "Lysychansk is ours," and waving the flag of the Donetsk People's Republic, the pro-Moscow separatist state that Putin claimed to be protecting when his forces invaded Ukraine. A video posted on Twitter Sunday showed. Western military analysts had expressed little doubt that Moscow would eventually prevail in the Twin Cities. Oh, you mean the same military analyst who said it was just a day or two before Russia ran out of munitions and before Russia retreated from the Ukraine with its tail between its legs? Those same Western military analysts? But with their loss, undeniable pressure redoubled on the United States and its allies to get the more powerful weapons they have promised Ukraine to the front. For nations in the West, however, in the next phase of the war will prove a test not just of military logistics, but of solidarity. As the conflict drags on, their own citizens are feeling the economic pain, and unity among the allies may be difficult to sustain. Russia now faces new challenges of its own. It controls more than a fifth of Ukraine. Much of its cities in name only skeletal remains, emptied of people after months of shelling, but it will need to replenish depleted forces and ammunition as it wages what promises to be a fierce, drawn-out ground war. And a lot of people in the West are beginning to get the sads about the Ukraine. One of them is the Canadian writer Michael Harris, who is normally screaming about Donald Trump. He has a piece in the Hill Times. War in Ukraine, latest victim of the West's attention span. Anyone who endorses giving an inch of Ukraine to Putin in the name of ending the war is woefully off the mark. That would not be peace. That would be a piece at a time. Get it? Get it? Harris begins, every morning I look out into the backyard at the Ukrainian flag hanging from the clothesline. It has been there since Russia invaded the sovereign country last February. Sovereign country? No, puppet state. Some days when the wind is brisk, it cracks and whips like a living thing. On others, it hangs straight down, like the head of someone who has received bad news. Today, it is completely limp, a solitary flash of yellow and blue, so motionless, it is as if it will never stir again. Was he crying when he wrote this? Since I hung it up there with wooden pegs months ago, the invasion of Ukraine has gone through many phases on the public clothesline of the world media. There was the initial phase of shock and outrage when it was not only the biggest story in the world, but for a time the only story. That was when free countries around the world, including this one, competed with each other to denounce Vladimir Putin's barbarous invasion. It was the time when Ukraine's stocky and resolute president became an international hero and media superstar. It was a time of glory to Ukraine, but no troops. Vladimir Zelensky was something of an anomaly. As a politician, he didn't offer the usual bull of tepidness and talking points. Instead, he projected authenticity, a fierce personal resistance to Putin's invaders that inspired a nation to stand its ground against a vastly superior enemy and fight to the death if necessary. Zelensky led by example, remaining with his people in the thick of war rather than accepting the safe haven offered to him and his family by several countries. He was such an inspirational figure that some foreign nationals rushed to Ukraine to confront the Russians, just as people once did in the Spanish Civil War. And they did it knowing that if captured, no Geneva Convention would stop the Russians from putting them against the wall for the 17-cent solution. The next development in the story was the what the hell do we do about it phase. To say the least, that was an evolving proposition. Before Russian troops poised on Ukraine's borders actually invaded, Canada, for example, initially balked at sending small arms to Ukraine. Ottawa eventually shipped artillery and anti-tank weapons, working on the theory that Ukraine had fought so valiantly and effectively against the Russians, they might even win the war. Since no Western country would intervene militarily in Ukraine, despite the outrage against basic democratic principles, I'll have something to say in just a couple of minutes about the basic democratic principles of Germany. Sanctions against Russia became the response of choice from those who didn't want to risk expanding the war, but couldn't stand idly by while Putin's men murdered innocent men, women, and children in the Ukraine. Zelensky's men have been murdering innocent men, women, and children in the Donbass for 8 years now, but no one gave a toss about that in the West. The reason they couldn't stand by was the devastating images sent back from Ukraine by war correspondents, videos of body-strewn streets, blown-up daycare centers, bombed hospitals, endless refugee lines, and broken and bowed people huddled in front of the ash heaps of their former homes. So there were sanctions against Russian oligarchs, members of Putin's inner circle, including Putin family members, some Russian bankers, etc. But it has been a game of doing a little and making it seem like a lot. How many tens of billions worth of stuff and money has the United States sent? It's over 50 billion. That sounds like a lot to me, but it's never enough. Seizing an oligarch's yacht might make good television, but it's no substitute for the aircraft and offensive weaponry the West has still denied to Ukraine. The proof that these initial sanctions were strategically minimal is that there have been so many new rounds of sanctions against Russia since then. In other words, if the initial sanctions had really been tough, there wouldn't have been so much room to improve on them later. Nearly 4 months into the war, Ukraine no longer routinely leads the nightly news. On the crowded clothesline of the US media, other stories have captured the public's attention. Americans now aim their outrage at gasoline prices over $5 a gallon to see the USA in your Chevrolet. Uvalde, Texas showed that Ukraine doesn't have a monopoly on atrocities as 19 fourth graders were gunned down along with 2 teachers in a school. Then there is the national melodrama playing out on television screens across the country as congressional investigators lay bare just how ruthlessly the Trump White House tried to hold onto power after losing the 2020 election. It's sedition by any other name, and judging by the recent testimony of White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson, an unhinged president, they're just going to double down on the lies of Cassidy Hutchinson. In particular, my favorite, that Donald Trump tried to seize control of the presidential limousine when it is known that that would not have been physically possible because of the deliberate isolation of the driver. Where does this leave Ukraine as the latest victim of the West's attention span? True, you can still catch President Zelensky on the occasional TV clip. And yes, European leaders like Boris Johnson and Olaf Scholz occasionally make the trip to Kyiv for the obligatory photo op with him. And yes, NATO and the G7 still have the rhetoric right, but the political winds are shifting. Some reports have characterized that change as fatigue with the war in certain quarters. Some people want the war to end, raising the question, is it Ukraine they are thinking about, or the prospect of a European winter without Russian gas and oil? Oh dear. Far from it for people to think that what happens in their own country is more important than what happens, halfway around the world in the most corrupt country in Europe. Sources say stories out of the White House and the Pentagon are hinting that senior officials no longer believe that Ukraine can win the war against Russia. The worst of it is this. There have all been reports that some members of the military think it is highly unlikely that Ukraine will ever be able to recover territory lost to the Russians in the Donbass. Together with the view that the war must end, it is not hard to imagine that the day may soon come when President Zelensky will be pressured to agree to a peace that would cede Ukrainian territory to Russian invaders. Anyone who endorses giving an inch of Ukraine to Putin in the name of ending the war is woefully off the mark. That would not be peace. That would be a peace at a time. Again, get it? So, let's talk about freedom and democracy in Germany. This is a shocking story, and I'm reading from the Kanakoas Substack. Germany labels journalist criminal and seizes her bank accounts for reporting from Ukraine. They closed her YouTube channel, blocked her PayPal account, and sentenced her to 3 years in prison without trial for interviewing Ukrainian citizens in the Donbass. A German journalist living in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region has been criminally charged by the German government for interviewing Ukrainian citizens and reporting her findings. Independent reporter, 28-year-old Alina Lip, moved to the Donbass area 6 months ago, where she transmits firsthand information to her audience in German, Russian, and English from her Telegram channel. Lip claims she is only doing what any journalist would do, interviewing citizens and documenting what is happening around her. The journalist explained she is doing interviews with people in Donetsk and merely translating them into German. I'm simply filming everything I see around. She asked, what is it that's illegal in that or dangerous? The controversy around Lip began in March when one of her videos explaining the history and the context of the war went viral. In Lip's viral video, she said, you need to understand that Russia has been asking for 8 years that the Minsk agreement be upheld. Ukraine did not adhere to it, nor did they approach the Donbass region in an attempt to come to an agreement. Instead, they have been bombing the outskirts of the Donbass region for 8 years. They are shooting at civilians who now also have to live in completely shot up houses. Very many people have died there. In the video, Lip alleged that the Donbass citizens who overwhelmingly voted to secede from Ukraine in 2014 had been thankful that Russia finally did something. Since soon after the video went viral, Lip's YouTube channel was closed, her PayPal account was blocked, and the Ukrainian government labeled her a terrorist. Last month, the journalist received a letter from Germany's prosecutor's office, which states that she now faces 3 years in prison for supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This comes after German authorities closed down her bank account and her father's bank account without warning. According to Lip, the German government has declared her guilty and she will not be able to defend herself in court. At the end of the letter, he says that they're not going to invite me to a hearing because this would disturb the investigations, and that is very interesting. So they are charging me, but they do not want to listen to me, she said in a video posted to her Telegram channel. Despite the charges against her, Alina Lip plans to continue reporting from Donetsk, which she said is being shelled daily by the Ukrainian armed forces. So apparently this story has been fact-checked, including by someone called Ewan Donacci, who responded, in Germany, it is illegal to support a war of aggression. Do American wars of aggression count? The prosecutor, therefore, considers her many pro-war statements, e.g. the denazification has begun, to be illegal and a danger to societal cohesion. This is not about preventing nuanced reporting. Oh, yes. She's a known propagandist, according to Ewan Donacci. Her claims have been subject to a lot of scrutiny in the German media. How about that? How about that for freedom and democracy? How about that? Apparently, she has 100,000 subscribers on Telegram, is connected to Sputnik, and was responsible for a lot of, wait for it, corona disinformation too. Not sure if it's just about making an example of her, but negative societal impact is one reason cited for prosecution. Yes, someone responded, how many people have been arrested in Germany over support for the Iraq war? Donacci replies, I don't think whataboutism is helpful here. The legality of the Iraq war is disputed. In contrast to Russia, people in the US, UK, Germany were free to protest against it. What I don't get is why so many on the left are swallowing Putin's right-wing propaganda without question. Take a look at the chat. Yo Mama says, I saw Elvis Friday night. Fantastic. Talking about Robin Williams? Ugh. Could never stand him, really. Hello to Quachalango, worse than Mork and Mindy. Truth-telling is very illegal, says Brian Frakes. One last thing about Hanks from me, says Anron. Bosom Buddies has to be the worst TV show to ever produce a huge movie star. How about a movie about one of Forrest's ancestors with Hanks in the lead? Tom Hanks is Nathan Bedford Forrest. I'm still hoping COVID-19 will go down in history as Tom Hanks' disease, says Anron. A very curious story. Him and his wife in Australia were the first celebrities to be reported to have the corona doom. And strangely, at a time when almost no one in the country had it. Wife of Ukrainian minister caught with $20 million US in cash at Hungarian border, says Palcasso 88. KMG, this is from Sam B. I heard you deplore Canadian defense tech Canadian airplane and aerospace and turbines in the 50s through the 70s were the best in the world. And this is from a proud American veteran. There's still people who are in Canada who are exercised by the canceling of the Avro Arrow. There's a model of it in near where the ferries leave for the mainland. Was Philadelphia the birth of the Oscar bait film? Asked Jason Quinn. I liked Apollo 13 very much. I think it's a tremendous movie, and it is kudos to the director for actually telling the truth and not modernizing it by showing us lots of women and Black people in the control center in Houston. Road to Perdition. Watched it, can't remember a thing about it, says Jason Quinn. That film is certainly Oscar bait. Joe versus the Volcano was pretty bad, says Jason Quinn. I know that Colby Kosh, my former colleague and roommate, is a big fan of that film. Quachilango said, I listened to John Fahey and Van Morrison. John Fahey, great guitarist. And hello to Seraphim Goose. So, what are we going to talk about now? Oh, yes. Let's talk about the American economy and Joe Biden's interventions thereby, which have raised the ire of Jeff Bezos, of all people. That Joe Biden, when he's not blaming Russia for high gas prices, he's blaming the oil companies. Biden doesn't seem to understand that when things become rare, they become more valuable. I would have thought that would be a simple thing to understand, but Joe Biden is not exactly running full throttle these days. This is from Natalie Wong at Bloomberg. Amazon.com Inc. founder Jeff Bezos criticized a tweet from President Joe Biden calling for oil executives to reduce gasoline prices. Bezos was responding to Biden's criticism of companies running gas stations and setting prices for consumers. This is a time of war and global peril, the president tweeted Saturday. Bring down the price you are charging at the pump to reflect the cost you're paying for the product, and do it now. Bezos tweeted Saturday night, ouch, inflation is too important a problem for the White House to keep making statements like this. It's either straight ahead misdirection or a deep misunderstanding of basic market dynamics. The national average for gas was at $4.81 Sunday, according to AAA, near the record high of $5.02 set last month. John Kirby, a senior national security spokesman at the White House, hit back at Bezos' statement. We obviously take great exception at the idea that this is somehow misdirection, Kirby said on Fox News Sunday. He said Biden has proposed measures, including at the Group of Seven summit, that could lower U.S. gasoline prices and has freed oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. If everybody cooperates on this, we can bring the price down by at least about $1 a gallon, Kirby said. Bezos has accused Biden of misdirection before. In May, the e-commerce executive hit back at a tweet from the president saying inflation could be tamed by making wealthy corporations pay their fair share. Biden has been criticizing oil and gas firms for making windfall profits. Gas and energy are a leading driver of inflation, posing a major political issue for Democrats with the midterm elections only months away. And now I'm going to move on to, more about the Ukraine and the neocons. Seems we're all neocons now, or it seems that most people in American politics are neocons. This is by Jeffrey Sachs at Consortium News. Ukraine is the latest neocon disaster. The war in Ukraine is the culmination of a 30-year project of the American neoconservative movement. The Biden administration is packed with the same neocons who championed The U.S. wars of choice in Serbia, 1999, Afghanistan, 2001, Iraq, 2003, Syria, 2011, Libya, 2011, and who did so much to provoke Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The neocon track record is one of unmitigated disaster, yet Biden has staffed his team with neocons. As a result, Biden is steering Ukraine, the US, and the European Union towards yet another geopolitical debacle. If Europe has any insight, it will separate itself from these US foreign policy debacles. The neocon movement emerged in the 1970s around a group of public intellectuals, several of whom were influenced by University of Chicago political scientist Leo Strauss and Yale University classicist Donald Kagan. Neocon leaders included Norman Podhoretz, Irving Kristol, Paul Wolfowitz, Robert Kagan, son of Donald, Frederick Kagan, son of Donald, Victoria Nuland, wife of Robert, Elliot Cohen, Elliot Abrams, and Kimberly Allen Kagan, wife of Frederick. The main message of the neocons is the U.S. must predominate in military power in every region of the world and must confront rising regional powers that could someday challenge U.S. global or regional dominance, most importantly, Russia and China. For this purpose, U.S. military force should be pre-positioned in hundreds of military bases around the world, and the U.S. should be prepared to lead wars of choice as necessary. The United Nations is to be used by the U.S. only when useful for U.S. purposes. The approach was spelled out first by Paul Wolfowitz in his draft defense policy guidance written for the Department of Defense in 2002. The draft called for extending the U.S.-led security network to Central and Eastern Europe, despite the explicit promise by German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher in 1990 that German unification would not be followed by NATO's eastward enlargement. Wolfowitz also made the case for American wars of choice, defending America's right to act independently, even alone, in response to crises of concern to the U.S. According to General Wesley Clark, Wolfowitz already made clear to Clark in May 1991 that the U.S. would lead regime change operations in Iraq, Syria, and other former Soviet allies. The neocons championed NATO enlargement in Ukraine even before that became official U.S. policy under President George W. Bush in 2008. They viewed Ukraine's NATO membership as key to U.S. regional and global dominance. Robert Kagan spelled out the neocon case for NATO enlargement in April 2006. Quote, "The Russians and Chinese see nothing natural in the color revolutions of the former Soviet Union, only Western-backed coups designed to advance Western influence in strategically vital parts of the world. Are they so wrong? Might not the successful liberalization of Ukraine, urged and supported by the Western democracies, be but the prelude to the incorporation of that nation into NATO and the European Union? In short, the expansion of Western liberal hegemony?" Kagan acknowledged the dire implication of NATO enlargement. He quotes one expert as saying, "The Kremlin is getting ready for the battle for Ukraine in all seriousness." The neocons sought this battle. After the fall of the Soviet Union, both the US and Russia should have sought a neutral Ukraine as a prudent buffer and safety valve. Instead, the neocons wanted US hegemony, while the Russians took up the battle partly in defense and partly out of their own imperial pretensions as well. Shades of the Crimean War, 1853 to 56, when Britain and France sought to weaken Russia in the Black Sea following Russian pressures on the Ottoman Empire. Kagan penned the article as a private citizen, while his wife, Victoria Nuland, was the U.S. ambassador to NATO under George W. Bush. Nuland has been the neocon operative par excellence. In addition to serving as Bush's ambassador to NATO, Nuland was President Barack Obama's Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs during 2013 to 17, when she participated in the overthrow of Ukraine's pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych, and now serves as Biden's Undersecretary of State, guiding U.S. policy vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. The neocon outlook is based on an overriding false premise that the U.S. military, financial, technological, and economic superiority enables it to dictate terms in all regions of the world. It is a position of both remarkable hubris and remarkable disdain of evidence. I joked years ago that given that everything that the neoconservatives have touched turns to ashes, why do they continue to dominate American politics and to a considerable extent dominate politics in Canada and Great Britain as well. Do they have compromising information on every major American politician? Sometimes it seems that way to me. I mean, they're just, I've also speculated in the past that, neoconservatism, it seems to be a mystery religion. What is the ultimate goal? Is it indeed blowing up the world? Is neoconservatism a death cult? Again, often seems to me as if that is precisely what it is. Let's go to Summit News. Oh, yes. Halifax Bank in Britain expressed their support for the alphabet people and going on about the importance of pronouns. And there was negative reaction to this. So then Halifax Bank threatened to report people to the police who had been mean to Halifax Bank on social media. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News reports people appear to be losing interest in the current thing as Russia gains more territory in Ukraine. Even some of the flags are being taken down. From the same source, as Americans celebrate July the 4th, a new poll shows that President Biden's job approval has sunk to its lowest level ever. A Civic's rolling job approval average shows that 18 months into his term, Biden's job approval stands at just 30%, while 57% disapprove of the job he is doing. With 12% of participants refusing to be drawn on whether they approve or disapprove of Biden, his overall net job approval now stands at negative 27%. The figure marks Biden's worst job approval since becoming president, and he is now underwater in 48 states, with only voters in Hawaii and Vermont showing more approval than disapproval. Having stood at 34% in May, Biden's job approval has sunk by a further 4 percentage points, with only 19% of independents approving him and 67% showing disapproval. Biden's popularity hasn't been helped by his endless verbal slip-ups, which has left many Americans concerned about his mental faculties. However, the most damaging aspect of his presidency has undoubtedly been his failure to deal with a cost of living crisis, which has seen inflation soar and gas prices hit new records. Biden loyalists have been increasingly absurd in trying to explain away gas price hikes and inflation, with former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers blaming people who downplay what happened on January 6th. Summers said the banana Republicans who are saying that what happened on January 6th was nothing or okay are undermining the basic credibility of our country's institutions, and that in turn feeds through for inflation. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink also ludicrously claimed nationalism was to blame for inflation. A recent Rasmussen poll found that a pathetic 11% of Americans believe Biden's rhetoric that Vladimir Putin was to blame for high gas prices. As previously highlighted, Donald Trump could be set to announce his candidacy at some point this month, with polls showing him far ahead of any other Republican competitors. Keep a hold of nurse for fear of finding something worse. If Biden goes, then Kamala Harris becomes president. But wait, there's another hat perhaps to be thrown into the ring. And this story by Douglas Schoen at The Hill makes me a happy man. He begins, earlier this year, I co-authored a piece for the Wall Street Journal that argued that a perfect storm in the Democratic Party is making a once unfathomable scenario, a comeback for Hillary Clinton in 2024, highly plausible. Our reasoning was that Biden's low approval rating, doubt about his capacity to run again, Vice President Harris's unpopularity, and the absence of another strong Democrat to lead the ticket have created a leadership vacuum within the party that only Clinton, as an experienced and politically savvy change candidate, can fill. Ooh, third time's the charm. In light of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, upending decades of precedent and revoking a constitutional right that American women have enjoyed for half a century, the case for Clinton's candidacy is even clearer. Regardless of one's own political affiliation or opinion of Clinton, the country knows her as an experienced politician and a champion of women's rights. From her declaration at the UN in 1995 that women's rights are human rights, to being the first woman nominated as a major party's candidate for president in 2016, she offers the exact type of leadership that the Democratic Party desperately needs. You mean the kind of leadership when you call the people who don't support you a basket of deplorables? Yes. No one, if you vote for the other guy, you are stupid and bad. That's not exactly my understanding of leadership. Schoen continues, ultimately, Clinton is the only prominent Democrat with the experience, the campaign infrastructure, and the political know-how, and the proven track record who can win a general election. As Fox News' Juan Williams wrote earlier this week, Democrats need a strong voice ready to fight to restore women's rights now that the Supreme Court has struck down Roe v. Wade. There's only one Hillary Clinton. Schoen concludes, if Democrats want a chance at winning the presidency in 2024, Clinton is, now more than ever, their best chance. Douglas E. Schoen is a political consultant who served as an advisor to former President Clinton and to the 2020 presidential campaign of Michael Bloomberg. I hope he made out like a bandit, Mr. Schoen. He is the author of The End of Democracy, Russia and China on the Rise, and America in Retreat. Run, Hillary, run. And this is a story by Eve Simmons for The Mail on Sunday. How California's legal cannabis dream became a public health nightmare. It's a Class B drug in the UK, but in this US state, it's led to spiraling addiction, psychotic illnesses, and hospitals facing a deluge of poisoning. A row of luxury healing creams is guarded by a locked glass cabinet gilded in gold trim. The packaging is stylishly minimal, clean and white, with a small black typeface, and beside the tubs sit a decorative artificial fruit and images of sprawling fields with a small flyer to remind customers of the high-quality, organic nature of the products. I spot one pot, a snip, at $43, or roughly 35 pounds, that is specifically designed for replenishing and rejuvenating tissues in the, I'm not going to repeat this. Alongside me, expensively dressed customers peruse the goods, clutching colorful iced smoothies and juices. I'm in the upmarket Beverly Hills in Los Angeles, California, and one of the area's many so-called wellness shops, just a stone's throw from designer boutiques such as Gucci and Saint Laurent. It's a far cry from Holland and Barrett, not least because all the products here at the Sarah Boutique contain high-grade, genetically engineered cannabis. There are balms and lotions, things to eat, and of course to smoke. One display cabinet showcases dozens of dried cannabis flowers, each bud sitting in its own pretty porcelain dish, labeled according to its supposed benefit, happiness, creativity, and relaxation. In another cabinet is a perfect grid of individual chocolate truffles, priced up to £5 a pop, a bit like something you'd find in the food hall in a department store. Only these sweet treats are laced with 10 mgs of THC, the psychoactive component in the marijuana plant. Recreational use of cannabis, which is classed as a Class B drug in the UK, a position of which could land you with up to 5 years in prison, has been legal in California since 2016. 2 decades earlier, it was made available to buy via a doctor's prescription to treat a variety of minor ailments from back pain to anxiety. Well, I have to note here that Peter Hitchens has written in the Mail on Sunday for many years now that the British police stopped enforcing the laws against cannabis many years ago. But back to Eve Simmons. Today, about 1 in 5 people in California use cannabis regularly, and it has become something of a health trend, not simply legal and above board, but judging by the stylish throng at Sarah when I visited, practically de rigueur. The sales assistants, who all look like Hollywood star turned health guru Gwyneth Paltrow, tell me of the variety of uses: aching muscles, headaches, anxiety, insomnia, arthritic pain, and many more. One willowy tanned brunette tells me, I take a very small dose every day just to calm my nerves. Any nerves I might be feeling. It's definitely changed my life for the better. Out on the streets, billboards advertising cannabis shops, or dispensaries as they are officially known, which makes them sound very medical, are on every corner, inviting customers to try alternative healing. But some shops are also art galleries, while others sell hipster favorites such as artisan coffee. If you walk the streets of Victoria, one might get the impression that cannabis is the top business on Vancouver Island. And of course, if you watch Canadian TV recently, you may come to the conclusion that sports betting is the only major industry in Canada. It seems like this happened overnight, that one out of every two commercials on a Canadian TV are for some form of sports betting. Simmons continues, you don't have to smoke the cannabis. You can eat, drink, and bathe in it, rub it on your sore spots, and even brush your teeth with cannabis toothpaste. It's an industry that turns over roughly 8 billion pounds and rakes in more than 2.5 billion in tax revenue every year. And I must admit, the way it's sold as some kind of divine health-giving elixir certainly makes the idea of dabbling more palatable, but I'm not here to partake, because behind the shiny pots and serenely smiling assistants, a far more disturbing picture is emerging. Over the past few years, doctors in California have begun to voice concerns about the repercussions of increasing cannabis use, in particular, how the laissez-faire approach is fueling a surge in addiction and mental illness. Many are particularly concerned about Los Angeles, where teenagers use the drug more often than in any other Californian city. I spent a week traveling across LA and beyond, meeting emergency doctors in the eye of the storm, as well as devastated parents who say their families have been torn apart by cannabis. Part of my journey followed in the footsteps of London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who recently visited a number of LA's dispensaries on a fact-finding mission. He announced that a new group would be set up to look at the benefits of legalizing cannabis in the UK, although Home Secretary Priti Patel dismissed the suggestion, saying he had no powers to make any such changes. Perhaps Khan would benefit from a chat with Dr. Ronit Lev, an emergency doctor at Scripps Mercy Hospital in San Diego, who tells me, we've been seeing the problems for a while now: depressive breakdown, psychosis, suicidal thoughts, all related to cannabis. The patients are regular people, not down and outs. I want people to know the truth about this drug. We've been sold a lie that cannabis use is harmless and even has a multitude of health benefits. It's exactly the same as what happened with tobacco. The industry told the public it was good for their health at first, before it was proven to be deadly. In California, hospital admissions for cannabis-related complications have shot up from 1,400 in 2005 to 16,000 by 2019. In California and the other 18 states that have legalized cannabis, rates of addiction are nearly 40% higher than states without legal cannabis, according to Columbia University research. A study published Thursday suggested recreational marijuana users were 25% more likely to end up needing emergency hospital treatment. And according to data from the U.S. Fatality Analysis Reporting System, the risk of being involved in a cannabis-related accident is significantly higher in states where the drug is legal. There are other concerns too, not least about the black market that has grown by nearly 100% since cannabis laws were relaxed, as bootleggers sell products at a lower price, undercutting the registered shops. Experts say these problems are mostly down to record levels of cannabis use, with roughly 40% of Californians now saying they've dabbled at least once, according to a California Department of Public Health survey. Just last week, the Mail on Sunday revealed that 9,000 Britons are regularly prescribed the drug by private doctors, in some cases outside of official rules. Pro-drug legalization campaigners have long seen medical use as a way to gain a foothold in public acceptance, and perhaps it's working. Polls show that between 30 and 40% of Britons are in favor of full legalization, with research suggesting 6 million would smoke cannabis if it was legalized. Well, yes, it's first for medical use, and then it's a cure for everything what ails ya. And of course, marijuana has been fully legalized in Canada for several years now, and you can see the results on the streets. It's pretty appalling. I saw this story about Canada's immigration minister, Sean Fraser, and it was written by a woman called Chelsea Nash. And it struck me as being less of a political profile and more of a love letter. So I wanted to find out who this Chelsea Nash woman was. And I found a piece that she wrote in May called How I Reclaimed My Body for Myself. I needed to turn inwards to find my worth, and to do that, I had to undo the package I had put myself in. She begins, my undoing started with a haircut. It was after a breakup, so maybe it started there. It was the first time in my life I had ended a relationship so decisively, putting my own needs before the feelings of the nice enough man who said he loved me. It was liberating. So there I sat at the salon, a cliche. My long bleached hair felt so heavy. It was midsummer and I was tired of the stickiness at the base of my neck. I was more tired of being looked at the way men look at young women with long blonde hair. I had just started my first professional job out of university, and the work environment was full of those looks. I returned home with my hair dyed its natural brown and chopped into a pixie cut. I don't think it had ever been shorter than my shoulders, and my roommate and I wrote, Boys Suck, on the wall we were painting. The message faded with each coat of paint that went over top of it, and with it, a former version of myself. After cutting my hair, the way I moved through the world, the way the world perceived me shifted. I didn't know it, but I was trying to escape the male gaze that felt superimposed on my identity. I was rejecting the womanhood I had worn to that point, which had brought me nothing but years worth of accumulated trauma. I wanted to exist in a body that was safe again. Growing up, I took constant and exhaustive mental notes on how to be a woman. It goes on with, for several hundred words. While the hair on my head was kept cropped, other hair on my body was allowed to flourish. I was curious more than anything to see my body take its natural state, something I truly had not witnessed since I was a child. I gained weight, part medication related. Oh, there we go. Part binge eating related, partly due to polycystic ovarian syndrome. The cause doesn't matter. What mattered was I tried hard not to care, but instead accept this new body that, in the eyes of popular culture, made me more sexless. I dressed more androgynously. I became more invisible. I adorned myself with tattoos. Here we go. Some soft and floral, others hard and vicious. An angry tigress on my leg to be my protector. Fig leaves on my arm, a reference to Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. Whatever happened to Sylvia Plath, by the way? And a coded declaration of my acceptance of my own precarious mental health. Is it just me, or does it seem that practically every female journalist is now somewhat, how shall I say, messed up? And okay, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is also defining herself as a woman in the wake of Roe v. Wade. This is from Chris Donaldson at BizPac Review. Democratic Representative AOC's fiery rhetoric over the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade has given way to her tendency to make everything about herself, and her so-called personal act of reclamation to protest the historic ruling was to have her nails done. On Friday, the socialist diva took to Instagram to share a video with her avid fans, claiming that even something as mundane as getting a manicure could be an act of resistance, quite possibly her most loopy statement yet, but one which will serve to inspire her demoralized followers and satisfy her narcissistic craving for constant attention. In the video, which begins with the New York City Congresswoman walking down the street wearing sunglasses, AOC has turned something as trivial and uninteresting as getting her nails done into a captivating take on defiance of perceived oppressors, as well as adding a personal touch on how she was raised in a strict conservative home. Boo! Hello, everybody. Happy Friday, AOC began. And I say happy because joy, too, can be an act of resistance. I want to talk about personal acts of reclamation, because sometimes people will say, there's nothing I can do. I can't do. I feel so powerless. And there's no act too small that you can engage in. And even today, I have a personal errand. I need to redo my nails. And I've decided that I'm going to use my new manicure as almost like a personal act of reclamation for me and my story. So I grew up in a pretty socially conservative environment, a very religious environment. I don't talk about it much, but that's just what it is. And it was very socially conservative again, like to the point where I couldn't even really paint my nails red until I pretty much graduated and left the house, because there was just a lot of discussion how red nails, red lipstick, it just portrays a message of what kind of woman that you are. And I think a lot of times that kind of woman, which is ungovernable, it often gets translated to loose, is seen as bad or negative. And I think, like, as I've grown older, what it really is power. Powerful women, bold women who do what they deem is best. That's how I'm choosing to reclaim it. And I kind of started stepping into that energy when I first started wearing red lipstick on the campaign trail. And then she showed us our red nails. AOC's story of her personal act of reclamation drew a savage response from Twitter. Well, I'm just reminded, I should have mentioned this earlier, that when I went to Chelsea Nash's Twitter page, that she describes herself in a certain way, which is now pretty much de rigueur. She describes herself as always tired. Yes, and the banner is a hand drawing of a cat. Yes, and always tired. Doesn't she mean exhausted? Aren't all of these women exhausted? Let's go back to the chat. AOC would have been great on Howard Stern's Dumber Than a Box of Rocks segment. Dan says she has long COVID. Is this confirmed? Don Willis says, face tats, neck tats, always raise a flag to this old grumpy guy. Hello to Art Mob, who says, great to join you all live. Cheers from the South Pacific. Best to all. Reasonable and Responsible says, we're talking about the shooter, the latest shooter. Seems that way, as one would only expect people who view themselves as having nothing to lose. I'm scared of all tattooed human beings, says Oscar Toe. These enormous tattoos on the legs, both the upper and lower legs. I mean, it used to be just the arms, right? Then they started appearing on breasts and legs and other places I'm not going to talk about. How far back must one go to find a mass shooter who could not, by objective metrics, be characterized as a loser? As Reasonable and Responsible. Occasional cortex, says Metal Mike. Nice one. Socialist diva, yes. Okay, yes, I believe she killed herself, Kevin, says Anran. Yes, Sylvia Plath. You know, when a woman tells you that she idolizes Sylvia Plath, best to run. Run as fast as you can. Why did this incel groper shoot up a parade in Illinois, says Ultra Testosterone? As I say, I don't like to talk about these things very much. I just think that it's symptomatic of an increasing level of insanity and a breakdown of civilization. God is great, says Don Willis. Happy 4th of July, gringos. Jason Quinn says the pills and supplements sold at gas stations are probably very high margin and could be considered health products. Peter Tosh considered cannabis to be a cure for glaucoma. Peter Tosh, he's not, is he alive? Let me just check here. I remember he had about 5 minutes of fame in the 1970s. He was murdered in 1987 during a home invasion at the age of 42. Jamaica is an exceedingly violent place. Let's talk about Bodega Bro. Very amusing story, which is ongoing. This is from Katie Daviscourt at the Post Millennial. A college grad from the Midwest found himself the latest victim of cancel culture when he publicly criticized New York City bodegas, small corner grocery stores, after moving to the Big Apple to start a career in the tech industry. Griffin Green, 24, of Michigan, was fired from the software company Outreach after he seemingly experienced a culture shock while attempting to shop for groceries in the South Bronx. Green detailed his experience shopping at local bodegas on his personal TikTok account, which has since been set to private. Okay, so I just moved to New York and I'm going to go grocery shopping. And so I type in like grocery stores on my Apple Maps, and every expletive deleted when I go to, they're like this, expletive deleted, Green said before panning the camera to show a local bodega. Like, bro, that's not a grocery store, he continued. I'm trying to get like eggs, yogurt, cheese, stuff like that. Like, look at this place. The Bronx is considered to be a food desert, a neighborhood where it is hard to find fresh produce and healthy foods. Could it be that the bodegas stock these foods only because that's what the people in the South Bronx want to eat? They're not interested in preparing their own food. They're not interested in healthy food. It seems reasonable enough to me. Frustrated with the lack of supermarkets in the area, he stated, like, I've literally been to like 5 of those now, and I don't know what I'm going to do about for dinner. Like, where are the Krogers and the Whole Foods at? I'm about to eat cereal and ramen for dinner. I mean, like, what the? There have been concerns shared by leftists and Democrats in New York that bodegas are often the only source of groceries available in many neighborhoods. The problem cited by the bodega bro is one the city leaders have been trying to remedy for decades. It wasn't long before the cancel culture mob came for him. An individual posted the clip of Green to their Twitter account, which resulted in backlash from users calling Green's remarks racist and insensitive. I'm sure this bro thought he was just being funny, but did anyone else view this as racist or just me? Blogger Perez Hilton wrote on Twitter. TikTok star Dutch de Carvalho slammed Green and said, I mean, what? He's been here like 2 days and he's found a way to make fun of the stores that many people in the community rely on. The video earned Green the moniker Bodega Bro after it went viral. Internet sleuths found more offensive content on his TikTok, which led to his unemployment. I'm in the Bronx for a few weeks, so I'm like the only white dude in this whole gym. So I got this NAACP shirt, so these people vibe with me more, Green purportedly said in a video. Oh, dear. Green also commented in another video on the number of gay people living in New York, questioning whether being gay is just a thing now. Individuals investigating Green's TikTok found out his place of employment in a video that he posted announcing his move to New York. An individual tweeted at Outreach and alerted them to Green's bodega video, asking them to take action. I don't think it's very flattering to have this type of person representing your company, they wrote to Outreach. I would revalue his employment if I were you. The request was successful. Outreach tweeted, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Upon investigation, we took swift internal action in accordance with our company policies and in alignment with our core values. He is no longer an employee of Outreach. People have raised the point, aren't New Yorkers supposed to be especially tough? And, they fly into pieces when someone makes a video mocking bodegas. Doesn't sound particularly tough to me. And now let's go to the Substack of Eugippius and his Plague Chronicle. Normal civic life has become an emergency. At the start of June, the German government introduced a 3-month period of essentially free public transit. Yes, and I spoke about that last week, actually. And 9 hours ago, no more special privileges for the vaccinated. All signs are that the German vaccination campaign is over. Last month, I wrote about the expert committee mandated by the German Bundestag to evaluate the effectiveness of lockdowns and other containment measures. While I was traveling, the report finally appeared. Its findings are less directly critical of containment than early leaks seem to suggest, but they still constitute a quiet rejection of signature Merkel-era policies. Is it perhaps a crime? Seriously, is it a crime in Germany? Something that would lessen social cohesion if people depart from the script, the Corona Doom script? Lockdowns, the report claims, work only at the beginning of an outbreak. As people become tired and cooperation declines, they lose their effectiveness. Test requirements targeting the unvaccinated reduced infections in the beginning, but became less effective as vaccine protection against infection waned. Whether or not school closures accomplished anything is allegedly unclear, but the report is stridently certain that masks are super effective, at least when worn correctly, which almost no one does. As I said last month, this is a political document intended to set the parameters for future containment policy in Germany. Its empirical findings aren't to be taken seriously, but from its pages, we can nevertheless learn important things. And from June 30th, a headline yesterday in Bild, Germany's largest daily newspaper, shows that their reporters too read Eusebius West dark, East light, huge contrast in the corona incidents. Yes, not very many infections now in the former East Germany, which is not the case in the former West Germany, because the East Germans, perhaps because of their years under communism, less susceptible to government propaganda. And I'm now going to go to Alex Berenson's Substack. I wonder if he's going to be allowed back on a Twitter. Declining birth rates post-COVID vaccines. Is it time to panic? In the last few weeks, vaccine skeptics have reported data from multiple countries showing a significant drop in birth rates starting in early 2022, approximately 9 months after mass COVID vaccinations began in people of reproductive age in those countries. It is worth noting that these are the smart skeptics, not the 5G conspiracy theorists. It is also worth noting that 5G types have largely disappeared from the conversation. The mRNA vaccine data on side effects and efficacy are now so bad that reasonable people have scary enough concerns to crowd out the crazies. Here's the most recent major data dive from the analyst who calls himself the Bad Cat. He examines data on Swedish births from the first quarter of 2021 and concludes, I think this makes the case that Sweden is just experiencing normal variability, look very weak, and that the case for a vaccine-driven effect look quite strong. This is not what I was hoping to find. If this is what it looks like, this is very bad news. And in better news, again from Berenson, despite a massive media and government pressure campaign, American parents are overwhelmingly rejecting COVID vaccines for their young children. About 1 week after the shots became available, barely 1% of children under 5 have received mRNA jabs for COVID, data from several states show. Even in California, among the bluest states, only 2% of kids under 5 have been jabbed. Demand is likely to be near zero going forward. The recent history of COVID shots shows that the increasingly tiny minority of mRNA fanatics get themselves or their children jabbed or boosted quickly after regulators okay new doses. So pent-up desire for new shots is likely non-existent. As usual, elite media outlets have largely refused to acknowledge this reality, instead running endless articles that seek to normalize and encourage the shots. Something from CNN. Let's start off with you and your family. You have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Have you gotten them vaccinated yet? And this is from Dr. Leanna Wen. Yes, I called my pediatrician's office as soon as the FDA authorized the vaccine to let them know that I wanted my kids to get vaccinated at the earliest possibility. The earliest appointment was last Monday, about a week after kids in the 6-month to 5-year-old age group first started getting their shots. Berenson continues, but at this point, many parents have seen and experienced the side effects of the vaccines for themselves. They also know firsthand that the shots do little, if anything, to stop Omicron infections, although they might not be aware how terrible the data truly are. And they know that COVID is a minuscule risk for children who are not already seriously ill, and that most kids have already been exposed. All the Sesame Street ads in the world can't change reality. Congrats, Elmo. You're in the 1%. Cute Band-Aid, though. As it becomes clear just how few little kids have gotten the shots, any future media and public health pressure campaigns will look embarrassingly out of touch. Someone may want to tell the Biden administration the less said about the pathetic decision to make those shots available for kids under 5, the better. Statement by President Biden on the first COVID-19 vaccines for kids under 5. Today is a monumental step forward in our nation's fight against the virus, with virtually every American now eligible for the protections that COVID-19 vaccines provide. That was on June the 18th. Again, that is very good news. Let's go to Daily Skeptic and get the latest news from the UK. Just Stop Oil protester who pulled Hey Wayne painting stunt has racked up 50,000 air miles on exotic holidays. One of the green protesters who sparked fury, one of the Just Stop Oil protesters who sparked fury today when she glued herself to John Constable's priceless artwork, The Hey Wayne, in the National Gallery, has been branded an eco-hypocrite. After emerge, she often flies off on exotic holidays and has racked up tens of thousands of air miles. Student Hannah Hunt, 23, is the co-founder of Just Stop Oil, whose social media pages are adorned with exotic holiday pictures from locations including Bali, Australia, and the Canary Islands. The aspiring psychologist has contributed chaos across the country after she was pictured gluing herself to roads, camping in the rafters of a major oil depot in Essex, and today stuck pictures over at John Constable's The Hey Wayne in London. She and fellow student and musician Eben Lazarus, 22, first plastered over Constable's masterpiece with pictures portraying an apocalyptic future before they glued their hands to the frame as security stood on and watched. The pair were quick to lecture the public on fossil fuels being a death project and warning of the total collapse of society, despite Hunt previously admitting she impulse flew to the Canaries to escape chilly British weather. The former XR supporter even used the trips to bolster her environmental credentials, telling social media followers from Bali, "Can we look back in another 50 years and say we did everything to protect our pretty cool planet?" If Hunt flew to every destination, she would have clocked up over 49,000 air miles over 5 years and been responsible for the emissions of 13 tons of carbon dioxide. The European average per person is 8.4 tons in a whole year, according to the My Climate website. This is from Toby Young. Woke Scout leaders ban terms like dinner ladies, man-made, and Christian name. Scout leaders have issued a new woke-style guide banning children from using the terms falling on deaf ears, man-made, and dinner ladies, according to the Mail. Children will also be prohibited from using maiden name and Christian name in a move to avoid causing offense to people of all genders, religions, races, and to those who live with a disability. Instead, Scouts are told to use first name or given name instead, while previous name is preferred to maiden name as it is an outdated term. Also included is school meals supervisors or school dinner assistants instead of dinner ladies. The document adds that Scouts, made up of children aged between 10 and 14, will now play broken telephone instead of the traditional Chinese whispers game, and people are told not to use down under to refer to Australia or New Zealand. It comes as the Scout Association is already facing a backlash after introducing a trans fun badge for members as young as 4. They really are seeking to be banned or sued out of existence, aren't they? And finally, from the Daily Skeptic, this is from Noah Carl. You may recall that at the start of the pandemic, surveys found remarkably high levels of support for lockdown. In a poll for March 2020, for example, 93% of Brits supported the government's COVID measures, only 4% were opposed. High levels of pro-lockdown sentiment continued into the second year of the pandemic. A poll taken in July 2021, so after months of lockdown and the vaccine rollout, found that 1/3 of Brits would support permanent social distancing and 45% would support permanent vaccine travel requirements. As I've noted before, one reason why public support for lockdown was so high in Britain and elsewhere is that people overestimated the risks of COVID. As George Davy Smith and David Spiegelhalter wrote in the British Medical Journal, adopting targeted approaches would require a shift away from the notion that we are all seriously threatened by the disease, which has led to levels of personal fear being strikingly mismatched to objective risk of death. In a poll from December 2020, 28% of Republicans and 41% of Democrats said the chance of being hospitalized if you catch COVID is 50%. The correct answer at the time was less than 5%. The poll was then repeated a whole year later, and the number of Democrats who believe there's a 50% chance of being hospitalized if you catch COVID hadn't budged. It was still 41%. That's the bad news. What's the good news? Well, a major global survey has found that most people on Earth believe their country limited freedoms too much during the pandemic. The Democracy Perceptions Index surveyed 52,000 people in 53 countries, comprising 75% of the world's population. Respondents were asked whether they agreed or disagreed that their government has gone too far in limiting people's freedoms. As the chart below indicates, there was net agreement with the statement in 50 out of 53 countries, the exceptions being Taiwan, Sweden, and China. And the Swedish result can obviously be explained by the fact that Sweden limited people's freedoms much less than most other Western countries. Not a lot of people complaining in Canada, sadly. And let's take another look at the chat. It just reminded, just the insanity of 2 years ago, the absolute insanity. I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, that when I was living in a different place in Victoria, when I would walk down Fort Street to save on foods to buy my groceries, people noticed that I had gray hair, and people would walk into the highway rather than pass me on the sidewalk because, you see, I'm old and I'm going to infect them and they're going to die. People believed that. They believed it at the time. They arrested the shooter, says Oscar Toe. Europeans have had tattoos in antiquity, says Chogokin 666. Any of you guys read Blood Meridian? Brutal novel, says Chogokin 666. When did tattoos first show up in the West? Well, I suppose, sailors have long had tattoos, but tattoos until fairly recently were associated with criminals. The anchor itself is an ancient symbol of Christ, points out Jogan 666. Who else do we have? Driss Duda. Haven't seen that name in a while. Isn't Christ on an anchor a ye old sailor, a Catholic thing? Let me guess. Just a guess. I saw it once or twice in the kitchen. Ruslan Akhmatov is reading a book about the life and teachings of Sheikh Al-Alawi from Algeria. Pretty profound, he says. Haiti used to be a destination for pleasure liners, I think, up to the 50s. Sad, really. That's a country that appears to be permanently broken. And it's one of those places, you used to read after the last earthquake, and they just sat on their hands in Haiti. Oh, the Westerners will come and rebuild everything, apparently, because apparently they're incapable of building things in Haiti. And we don't hear very much about Haiti anymore because it's just too horrible to talk about. Thank you, Don Willis. All we are saying, it's give Kyiv a chance, says Ruslan Akhmatov. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of cringe about that starting really soon. Hey, weren't you wearing a Ukrainian flag, lapel? Didn't you have a Ukrainian flag flying from your house? Weren't you always going on about Zelensky? No, I didn't know. That wasn't me. You must be confusing me with someone else. No. I'm pretty certain that was you. Okay. The Lil Baby all in potato chips are kind of, what? Okay. I don't know what that is about. This story about outreach is outrageous, says Jay Boss. I believe it was a woman who thinked on Bodega Bro. Certainly, the tone of her outraged tweet was very womanish. Let's look at William Briggs, statistician to the stars. And top 10 fireworks safety first tips. Okay. Yeah. May I see your ID? He asks. I almost never include personal information on the blog, but in this case it is necessary. Here's a picture of yours truly from about 2 weeks back. I am demonstrating, like King Canute, the futility of commanding the waves to obey me. His subjects didn't believe him either. Anyway, the following conversation, stripped to the essentials, took place between yours truly and the manager, a good guy, and I'd say 20 years younger than me, at a chain grocery store. I was buying wine. Do you have an ID? What for? I bought wine here many times and never needed an ID. It's a new policy. Why? Don't I look old enough? Well, we need the ID. Why? Do I look anywhere near 21? All the major chains, he named them in the area, are now doing it. That they are. But why? Do I look too young? It's for your safety. Safety? How is it making me safe for you to see my ID? It's policy. But why is it policy? I don't look anywhere near 21. And now you see why I include today's photo to show you, dear reader, that I do not look underage. The conversation went on like this for a little while. I could see that the poor manager saw my point. I'm obviously older than 21 and not even close to 21. And any sane, rational, even partially sober adult could see that I'm far past 21, but he could not bring himself to admit this obvious fact out loud. In the manager's favor, and because I don't carry an ID, he let me slide. This time, he said, by having me state my birthday duly entered into the computer by a clerk. This happened to me buying cigarettes at a gas station that was across the street from me in Victoria on 4th Street. You need my birth date and you need picture ID proving how old I am? You can look at me, you see the wrinkles and the gray hair and the thinning at the temples. You can see how old I am. Again, it's policy. And again, everyone is doing that now. A woman behind me in line nodded whenever the manager mentioned safety. I mentioned the conversation that I could understand ambiguous cases, people who live close to the edge. This is why some stores, fearing being attacked by the state, have signs like, "We card if you look under 40." Policies which are, I think, a reasonable compromise between asinine but aggressive government desire and common sense. But no, we have to pretend in our safety-first effeminocracy that adults can no longer judge a person's age. We have to leave that crucial, difficult, error-prone measurement to the government, which is staffed by experts, and only they alone can certify age, and have you, by mandate, must carry a document which prints that age on it, which grocery store clerks can look at instead of your face. Because there might be a chance, even a disappearing one, but still a chance, that somebody might make a mistake, and a man like my dad, who looks past 80 and is past 80, might actually be 20 and trying to sneak a beer. But just think how low society will sink if once or twice a decade, a 20-year-old who appears to be 80 manages to buy a six-pack. Safety first. Hey, if the policy saves just one life, it's worth it, right? Now here, if you are like most, you would say to me, "What's the big deal, Briggs? Just show them your ID. It's painless." It isn't painless. It's stupid. It's dumb. It's senseless. I don't want to carry an ID wherever I go, and only for the purpose of demonstrating what is plain to anybody except experts or their designated stand-ins. Because it's creeping incrementalism. Because if they require an ID for buying a bottle of wine, they will require it for something else. Because if we authorize experts to make decisions in this small, stupid thing, they will insist on making decisions in all things. Good grief, the slippery slope is not only a fallacy. Politicians and activists spend their mornings with great barrels of grease. Whatever is not forbidden is mandatory is not only a slogan, it is a stated desire. If we only create enough rules and manage enough behaviors, utopia can be ours. The same thing is found in those who demand sports, which is only entertainment, have mandatory computerized reviews. I know I am waging a losing battle. I know that resistance is futile, especially when the young, our future, as politicians always needlessly remind us, are a pack of sniveling, cowardly, timid, touchy, frightened, shivering blob of safety firsters. And there's a tweet here from Mark Goodwin. An independent think tank, the Higher Education Policy Institute, has helpfully asked a representative sample of UK university students their views, comparing and contrasting the picture in 2022 with the picture 6 years ago in 2016. Here's what they found. 79% of students believe students that feel threatened should always have their demands for safety respected, up from 68% in 2016, while 4% disagree, down from 10% in 2016. And Briggs concludes, this tendency toward fear can only grow worse, especially as fewer marry and seek protection not from family, but from the state. The state is mother, the state is father, the state must protect us. Of course, many students these days claim to be unsafe when they hear something they disagree with. So get ready for 100% of university students feel unsafe at all times. Because again, as Briggs points out, you just can't be too careful. Let's talk about J.K. Rowling. And apparently her views are considered controversial. I guess in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act, as Orwell said. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The transgender Twitter user who posted a pipe bomb threat directed towards J.K. Rowling and her family has been revealed to be an Irish anti-racism activist and is now under police investigation. The controversy began when Rowling, who has become a sworn enemy of trans activists for her refusal to accept the erasure of women, revealed the threat on Twitter. My family's address covered a pipe bomb and a picture of a bomb-making handbook. The account remains active. Naturally, be kind, tweeted the Harry Potter author. The account that made the threat was deactivated, then deleted by the owner with no action taken directly by Twitter. The latest threat came after Rowling expressed support for a male detransitioner who shared his story about how he was pressured into a sex change. Rowling is constantly bombarded with death threats by transgender activists, many of whom face no consequences either from police action or mere Twitter bans. I have now received so many death threats I could paper the house with them, the author previously tweeted. Yes, an Irish ginger called Shane is responsible for this. So a piece in Politico called The Metamorphosis of J.K. Rowling. When it comes to trans rights, some fans believe the Harry Potter author is more Death Eater than Dumbledore, which I suppose means something to people who read these books. And there's a portrait of J.K. Rowling, and it looks like oil has been poured on her head. This is by a woman called Sarah Wheaton. I should mention, one of my daughters was mad about Harry Potter, and it still is. Had to get all of the books on publication day. Had to see all the movies when they were first on the day of release. This piece begins, when it comes to J.K. Rowling, even some of the children's author's biggest fans are finding it increasingly necessary to separate the work from the creator. Oh, dear. Join the Potter Trail walking tour in her adopted hometown of Edinburgh, and you'll learn that Rowling wrote much of the first Harry Potter novel at Nicholson's Cafe. The establishment was co-owned by her brother-in-law, so as a broke, recently divorced single mother, she could nurse cheap espresso all day without guilt for taking up a table. You'll also be told how, as a best-selling author 12 years later, Rowling treated herself to exclusive luxury while finishing her last novel at a suite in the five-star Balmoral Hotel just a half mile up the road. On a cold, blustery Wednesday in February, a Potter Trail guide named Alex recounted how Rowling downed a bottle of champagne by herself to celebrate the triumphant moment because she's a legend. The tour is free, but Wizarding fans are encouraged to provide an optional donation, 10 to 20 pounds, recommended, cards accepted. A proportion goes to the Scottish Trans Alliance, an activist group promoting rights for transgender people. Many of you may be aware of J.K. Rowling's recent tweets concerning transgender issues, reads an explanation on the tour group's website. It is a difficult time to be a Harry Potter fan for many, but we sincerely wish J.K. Rowling's views not to diminish our appreciation of the books and their messages of inclusion and tolerance. They're carrying on about J.K. Rowling as if she were someone like Louis Ferdinand Céline. The disclaimer is a quiet but unambiguous protest against Rowling's buzziest body of work since her blockbuster series of schoolboy sorcery. It's also a tiny but telling example of how, in a few short years, the author has gone from being an unobjectionable matron of the political left to one of its most hated villains. Rowling's views and her willingness to exchange biting blows with her online critics have been denounced by fans as transphobic, a betrayal of the values of tolerance they learned from her books. Stars of the Harry Potter movies have disavowed her statements. Celebrities have taken their distance. Major websites devoted to the wizarding world have said they'd stopped writing about her. On the other side of the spectrum, Russian President Vladimir Putin has bemoaned that she's been canceled. None of this seems to have given Rowling pause or done much to put a crimp in her commercial prospects. 25 years after the publication of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, her books continued to fly off the shelves. The third installment of the Harry Potter spin-off Fantastic Beasts hit theaters in March. If anything, as the criticism has mounted, Rowling has only become more combative, cheerfully retweeting her detractors to trigger pile-ons from fellow thinkers. What's more, when it comes to driving the debate, she seems to be winning. Oh no! Asked earlier this year by an anonymous poster whether her battle was a hill she wanted her legacy to die on, she answered tartly, "Yes, sweetheart. I'm staying right here on this hill, defending the right of women and girls to talk about themselves, their bodies, and their lives in any way they damn well please. You worry about your legacy. I'll worry about mine." Bravo. For most of her career, Rowling sat politically in the milquetoast center-left. In a speech to Harvard graduates in 2008, she described her first job out of university at Amnesty International, where the personal testimonies of African political prisoners and victims of torture stirred her soul. She told the Ivy League graduates that their elite status and influence is your privilege and your burden, and exhorted them to use it on behalf of those who have no voice. In 2010, she wrote movingly of having relied on the welfare state when her life hit rock bottom, explaining why she was happy to keep paying British taxes. This is, if you like, my notion of patriotism. Indisputably, Rowling has been extraordinarily generous. She famously gave so much to charity in 2011, 16% of her net worth, that she was knocked off the Forbes billionaire list the next year. Most recently, she pledged to match up to £1 million in donations to her charity Lumos for its work helping vulnerable children in Ukraine. Yes, this is a very, very, very long article. Author who writes kids' books accused of having transphobic views. Wow. If anybody knows what it's like to follow Rowling's path from popular progressive to pariah, it's Suzanne Moore. A former leftist columnist for The Guardian, she underwent a similar saga after she wrote a piece in March 2020 sticking up for a historian whose speech to a feminist conference was canceled due to links to a group opposed to gender self-identification. There's some Orwellian language for you. Moore's underlying message was a plea to focus on a shared mission. The materiality of having a female body may mean rape or it may mean childbirth, but we still seek liberation from gender, Moore wrote. But it was also a defiant call to arms. You can tell me to die in a ditch turf all you like, as many have for years, but I self-identify as a woman who won't go down quietly. There are more of us than you think. Apparently, Moore had fewer sisters in arms than she hoped for. Within a week of the column, 338 of her colleagues on both sides of the Atlantic signed a letter accusing The Guardian of being hostile to trans rights and trans employees. Moore left The Guardian voluntarily in November 2020. With a CV that includes street activism on AIDS, bylines in Marxism Today, and decades in journalism devoted to confronting the liberal Oxbridge elite on their failures toward the working class, Moore has always considered herself radical and left. Now she's accused of being funded by Christian right-wing evangelicals. Moore now writes a regular column in The Telegraph, a right-leaning newspaper. Between that and her Substack, she's making more than she was before, yet she's still adjusting to the idea that the debate about trans rights has become totemic and may define her legacy. It doesn't matter what I say or do, she said. I'm transphobic. I'm a TERF. I go around doing terrible things to trans people in my spare time. You know, that's how I'm seen by certain people. She and her daughters have faced threats of rape bad enough to call the police, and she asked one of her daughters if she wanted to drop the name Moore, lest she face cancelization by association. Pretty dangerous, to speak the truth these days. You know who else is in trouble with the trans folk? Why, that would be Bette Midler. Yes, indeed. She's up for it now. Let's see. Bette Midler will be educated over the next few hours and will apologize for not understanding and acknowledging the struggles and the lived experiences of trans and non-binary people whose identities are valid, and she values them, blah, blah. I'd put money on it. A Canadian journalist who writes for the Quillette, Jonathan Kay, responded to Bette Midler's tweet, which goes, "Women of the world, we are being stripped of our rights over our bodies, our lives, and even of our name. They don't call us women anymore. They call us birthing people or menstruators and even people with vaginas. Don't let them erase you. Every human on earth owes you." Kay opined, "When you've lost Bette Midler, the progressive gig is officially up." Yeah. What has occasioned this extraordinary rage against people like J.K. Rowling and Suzanne Moore and now Bette Midler? It's because liberalism is dead. It's finished, as is the age of reason. It's harmful for you not to accept us at our own word, that you must not only accept us, you must cheer for us, march in the parades and the like, and wave the flag. And if you don't, you are attempting to erase us. Are the trans activists going to come hard for Bette Midler now? She's erasing all your intersectional gains toward erasing women. Okay. And I want to talk now. Oh, yes. Some news from Canada. This is by Colin Horgan and his Substack, Modern Hell. Apparently, evil things are afoot in my country of Canada. Maple-flavored paranoia, American-style discourse has infected Canada through social media. Now, what? You see, because freedom is not a Canadian value. We've been told this for decades now. Canadian politicians, MPs, you guys are wearing panic buttons. That says a lot. When a government is afraid of its own citizens, they are not long for this world. Prolific TikToker Tom the Proud Canadian 21.2 ranted a couple of days ago before quoting the 5th of November poem about the gunpowder plot of 1605. It's almost as if our government completely forgot that 1776 happened. It's almost like they forgot why it happened. He continued, mixing his national histories. Among the many hashtags he added to his video was Patriots Without Borders, a portal into an endless chaotic library of wild-eyed first-person warnings from both sides of the border about social collapse and vague allusions to a plan set in motion by the powers that be. You see, I don't know whether it will soon be illegal in Canada to watch Fox News, perhaps, dangerous ideas coming from Tucker Carlson. But the same people who rant about, oh, why are you paying attention to the United States? The United States isn't Canada, are the same people who have been screaming about Donald Trump for 7 years now, and how Donald Trump is somehow going to, or has already, infected Canada. It's always been impossible for Canadians to avoid America's influence. Cross-border culture war seepage has been a concern ever since the threat of actual war dissipated near the end of the 19th century. The internet didn't create Canada's absorption of American political and social habits, good and bad, but something has changed since the social media era. What happens in America now resonates in a different way. People have begun to hear things differently, interpreting the U.S. culture within a new mental framework. Whereas worry has long driven Canadian interpretation of American culture, what's driving people here now is something more profound and more distinctly American: paranoia. Social media is an accelerant for conspiracy thinking, but does misinformation cross borders? Last year, a study led by McGill University used data from Twitter to examine the spread of COVID-19 misinformation across the border between the US and Canada. Unsurprisingly, they found Canadian users typically follow more Americans than Canadians and also reshare a lot of Canadian American tweets. 45% of the accounts they looked at shared US-based content. As for the relationship between exposure to US-based information and direct propagation of COVID-19 misinformation, we find that exposure to US Twitter accounts is associated with more direct engagement with COVID-19 misinformation on social media, as well as with actually posting tweets containing COVID-19 misinformation. Social media exposure is related to COVID-19 misperceptions in large part because of its capacity to amplify the impact of content coming from the US information environment, the researchers found. So what exactly is this misinformation about the corona doom? How much of what the experts told us turned out to be exaggerated or outright falsehoods? Strange how that never gets discussed. Belief in some conspiracy theories. Big events, wars, recessions, elections controlled by small groups secretly working against the rest of us. 44% of Canadians agree. Much of our lives are controlled by plots hatched in secret places. 41% agree. A group of people is trying to replace native-born Canadians with immigrants who share their political views. 30%, 7% agree. Well, Canadians are being replaced with immigrants, and that's a good thing, except noticing it is a bad thing. Canadians, 20% believe that WEF, the group of elites with secret strategy to impose on the world. Well, it's not a secret strategy. They say it outright. Secret societies control the world. 22% of Canadians believe this. Gates use I'm not going to repeat that. Here we go. Yep, the go-to guy, Richard Hofstadter. The key marker of paranoid discourse in 1964, when Richard Hofstadter famously labeled the paranoid style of American politics, he linked it directly to a long-standing belief in conspiracy theories and noted how its participants didn't simply believe for themselves in grandiose false narratives, but intentionally spread them. As a member of the avant-garde who is capable of perceiving the conspiracy before it is fully obvious to an as yet unaroused public, the paranoid is a militant leader, Hofstadter wrote. Convinced they are one of the few who sees things clearly, these militant conspiracists see only a zero-sum game in every facet of society, in every culture war. He does not see social conflict as something to be mediated and compromised in the manner of a working politician. Oh, yes, compromise. For instance, in my Canada, where it is not only legal and celebrated to sexually mutilate children, for people to counsel against this, even their parents, is now a crime, which can result in imprisonment. And Richard Hofstadter's very clever trick was essentially to label people who disagreed with him politically as mentally ill. And I'm going to finish up. No, before I get into that, everything's a hate symbol now. This is from Andrew Kozak at True North or TNC.news. A booklet made for school children that calls the red ensign flag a hate symbol and identifies the Conservative Party as a target of infiltration by racists was approved by Cabinet yesterday as a taxpayer-funded project. The new resource will be delivered through workshops in schools across the country, and it will help raise awareness with students. Diversity Minister Ahmed Hussein told reporters the booklet would help teach core values to our kids. According to Blacklock's reporter, Hussein approved a $268,000 grant to fund the guide Confronting and Preventing Hate in Canadian Schools. The guide, written by the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, also warns students to be wary of classmates who speak fondly of Donald Trump. CON is a federally subsidized group that earlier received an identical grant to operate its website. Hussein says it is an organization that I respect very much. Yes, another NGO, which is funded by the government and then gives us government talking points. This is how Canada is run now. In a chapter on hate-promoting symbols, the booklet names the red ensign flag as offensive, even though it was used as Canada's national flag until 1965. Its usage denotes a desire to return to Canada's demographics before 1967, when it was predominantly white, the booklet says. The booklet refers to the Conservative Party twice as a group whose members include bigots and groypers, defined as a loose collection of young white nationalists. Without elaborating, the guide writes that they sometimes attempt to infiltrate mainstream conservative political parties. Yes, if you don't vote for the Liberals or the NDP, that makes you an evil person. And that's coming straight from the government. And I'm going to end up with, hang on just a sec here, with Frank Wright's Substack. And just let me call this up. Forgive me for the delay. And this is on the topic of, well, yes, the center. We're all centrists now, right? This is called The Ideology of the Madhouse, part 2 in a series on Bonapartism and the radical center. And Napoleon I was himself not a Bonapartist, having invented the idea, but described himself in the mold of Caesar. Caesarism is a related mode of government whose obvious factors of generalship and the replacement of a republic with an emperor do not fully do justice to the comparison. Mussolini and Franco were described as Caesarist, though it is to the Marxist I turn for a noteworthy observation of the relevance of this concept. Antonio Gramsci thought that Caesarism was brought about in a procedural way and without necessarily having a Caesar. This is because he considered Caesarism to be the result of a crisis of political authority, where traditional party allegiances break down, leaving the established parties outmoded. We live in a time when this is again broadly true. Parties have abandoned their roots for a contest over a radical center. In so doing, they have left their electoral bases homeless, whilst pursuing policies derived from what was generously termed paternalism. Both Roy Jenkins and Lyndon B. Johnson executed policies in the teeth of public opinion for their own good. Desegregation at gunpoint, the abolition of the death penalty, the legalization of sodomy. These policies were enacted due to the self-belief typical of centrists, which betrays their instincts and reveals their extremism. It is typical of the inheritors of this type of paternalist tradition to be mediocrities with a messianic sense of mission. The ominous grise of centrism, Tony Blair, successfully rebranded his own party machine to provide a program of mass immigration and the dismantling of the national culture defrayed by rising consumer aspiration. As we shall see, what began as a paternalist program of civil reform has resulted in an ideology of sickness and insanity. The political brand of globalism is centrism. This is the idea in elections that you speak to the greatest possible number of people in canvassing, only to follow the same agenda as before once in power. To the self-identified centrist, this position is the epitome of wisdom, balanced not too far in either bogeyman direction. To us in Britain, centrism is Blairism. This is pursued by leaders brimming with self-belief, sometimes messianic, with a sense of entitlement to lead the population to outcomes for which it did not vote and for which it will bear the cost in obligatory silence. This centrism, the attempt to capture the maximum votes by the broadest appeal, presents itself according to the moment when seeking power, but pursues a perpetual agenda once that power is secured. The moment for Blair himself was the malaise around the major government when things can only get better. Cameron's Conservatives went green. Recently for Boris, it was to get Brexit done. What did get done? Did things only get better? New Labour, itself an advertising slogan, had great branding. What it set in motion was the kind of politics for which Emmanuel Macron is now the global figurehead: open borders, mass immigration, the destruction of the traditional way of life. It offered a model of a so-called stakeholder society, which replaced the real one. Obviously, people whose ancestors built the country had a stake both in the industry and architectural vernacular, as well as in the institutions and customs developed from the Christian habits of their forebears. This was supplanted by a Rawlsian idea of fungible nobodies, replaceable abstract people from anywhere, believing anything or nothing to make a nowhere of the somewhere we used to call home. The green industry and its convenient message of leveling down for the masses is also a feature. To this are added the deeply illiberal and outrageous policies surrounding COVID, whose safetyism flatters the most timorous, selfish, and unprincipled people of all, while garlanded in sentimental and even heroic propaganda. Almost every liberal democracy in the world voted for these measures. When understood as a process of liberalization, of the deliberate removal of all norms, the result of centrism has been a great misnomer. What has been done in its names is nothing short of extremism. In a generation, the countries it has dominated have become unrecognizable demographically, culturally, and politically. Our customs and culture have been eroded by centrism and its virtue by arithmetic to amusing relics to be mocked at a distance. And Frank Wright continues, centrism has concentrated power in the national and supranational bureaucracies which act in their own interests. It's the expression of managerialism in political terms. The EU and NATO are attempting to provoke escalation in Ukraine to preserve their relevance. The WHO is attempting to supplant national sovereignty in its claim to lead future pandemic responses. This is a typical mission of the bureaucracy to seek greater power, a process of perpetual self-aggrandizement. Healthcare has become a vaccine delivery service. The civil service, which is the permanent bureaucracy of state, is beholden to unconscious bias training, diversity promotion, and the rainbow agenda. These are minority obsessions whose large-scale adoption by the corporations have rendered them a condition upon which your career has become contingent. No one voted for this. For these reasons, I argue that centrism, far from being some sensible middle path between the Scylla of socialism and the Charybdis of conservatism, is an extreme ideology which has established its power base in government institutions and corporations. It results in a managerial society. We are managed, not led, where the decisions of the management are non-negotiable and are decided independently of the wishes of the people who nominally elect them. Managerial centrism is the system of power administered through autonomous bureaucracies motivated by their shared ideology. It promotes dependence, dissolves independence, and it is assimilationist. It presents the individual with a false dilemma: to join the program and repeat its slogans, wave its flags, or to be excluded. Both outcomes result in atomization. To acquiesce in the new values of the new reality is to celebrate your own humiliation. You're accepting the terms of a group of refugees from reality who hate facts and wish to make us all inhabit a world where their mention is prohibited when contrary to their beliefs. This is the reason these organizations, educational, public services, and private corporations, are dominated by broken people. They are hives of resistance to the outside world and epitomize a state of war against the consensus reality outside their flat art, pastel-colored walls. The values promoted by this regime celebrate weakness, vice, and incontinence. To be resentful and unstable is a positive adjustment model in a system which lionizes destructive behavior, which is termed progressive. You will find every bureaucracy of the regime acting in a way reminiscent of self-harm. The most obvious such trait is the rote promotion of candidates for any reason other than their competence. This is akin to adding sand to your own petrol tank. The engine is indeed misfiring, and soon it will seize up altogether. Frank Wright concludes, regime bureaucracies mirror the neurosis of their preferred employees in their schizotypal behavior. The ideology insists on a contradiction of basic facts of reality, making it the worldview of choice for those animated by resentment at their own personal failure. It is a vast convalescent home for the casualties of its own campaign. This is the reason they are now closed to the mass of normal people. No sane person would break into an asylum in order to join the inmates. And that is, again, from the excellent Substack of Frank Wright, frankwright.substack.com. And let's have a final look at the chat. Okay. Let's see. Which it may still be up on Cato's channel. All right. Type Victoria and Franco in YT search. Okay. His entry into Madrid, followed by the Moroccan border guard, was one for the ages. It's up on YouTube, says Ruslan Akhmatov. I thought that was Dumbledore. Harry is gay too. No, I don't think it's Harry. Dumbledore was, I believe, as the kids like to say, retconned into being gay. Particularly, I suppose, perhaps because of the homosexual actor who played him in the films. Oscar Toe says the J6 thing seems like something nobody cares about, yet someone is using it as a valid hearing to do something extremely stupid. Barbara and Betty make me jealous of Helen Keller, says Paul Casso 88. Khan, yes. This is Brian Frakes. This is, the fellow who runs that organization, used to be the head of the Canadian Jewish Congress, which ended up being essentially shut down years ago. Probably nothing to do with his leadership of it. Woke works like a religion, hence Jerusalem, Athens is too rational, and Mecca is not a source antenna of perversion, says Ruslan Akhmatov. Betty and Barbara Streisand always look to me like Jim Henson creations. Well, yeah. How about Bette Midler? She's almost 80 now, I think. Wow, she's a very, very angry woman. Trump broke her. Ruslan Akhmatov says evangelicals are not trying to undermine a natural law. Big distinction. Idris Dudu says maybe evangelicalism has disappointed us, but I'd rather have an evangelical mom than some super progressive top surgery mom. Okay. I used to like her hit "Do You Want to Dance in the Rose," says Ruslan Akhmatov. I've never much liked her Friends of Dorothy song stylings, but I thought she was once a very amusing comedic actress. So that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the 4th of July, all my American friends. And I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.